Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and of course last time we successfully completed Solar's Cambria Arena run, and in terms of how that one ranked, in difficulty relative to other people's arenas, I would say roughly middle of the road there. We were talking about how we were fortunate in that Solar, of course, is predominantly a light elemental damage based character, and most of the enemies that we faced were enemies that were weak against light damage, only a few there toward the end that were not. As for who we have for today, though, well, it will be none other than MERAEADOR. So, MERAEADOR is another very unique character, and so let's talk more about what MERAEADOR has going on before we head into the arena. Think about what we need to plan for here. So MERAEADOR, once upon a time, was one of, if not our lowest level party member. However, at the moment, after doing things to pick up and master skills, already up to level 39 here, which I believe is roughly the highest other than Mardek in the party, so looking pretty good on that front there. Does mean that even before we take into account any items, we're sitting on a 1,200 life, which is a decent place for us to be. Of course, if we can pick up a little bit more, that'd be nice, but not as desperate, say, as it was with people like Solar or Eloian. In terms of MP, that's not so relevant with MERAEADOR, because I don't think that MERAEADOR has any skills that use MP at all. So for that reason, don't need to worry there. And in terms of attributes, relatively well balanced for MERAEADOR. In terms of strength, vitality, spirit, agility, nothing that is obviously really low that we will need to compensate for. Yes, the 12 agility, perhaps finding a way to get a little bit more than that so that MERAEADOR can more consistently go before his enemies. That might be helpful when we can, but I think that if we were to, say, go the haste route with the yellow fairy, which we'll get to in a second, then that might be a way to compensate for that a little bit. Alright, so with that being said, how about we take a look at our items here and what our options are. So the thing that makes MERAEADOR most unique relative to other characters is the weapon spot, because none of MERAEADOR's weapons have base damage values. They all base their damage on MERAEADOR's level. So in that case, at least from an offensive perspective, MERAEADOR's level matters more than almost everyone else. So for that reason, it's great that we did get him all the way up to level 39. I think we will find things are a fair bit easier for that reason. So, in terms of what weapons we have to choose between, we have the Thermal Spanner, the Gas-O-Matic, the Sleep-O-Matic, and the Flamethrower. Now, the other thing about MERAEADOR's weapons that are so unique to him is that when MERAEADOR is equipping a weapon, that is the only skill that he will have access to. So we were talking before about characters that have a limited access to different types of elemental damage. MERAEADOR, quite literally one. With whatever weapon we happen to choose, that's what we have for the rest of the run. Of course, we won't have the option to change that mid-run, so we're going to have to be very mindful, very careful with which option we choose to pursue here, because if we find that we run into, say, a bunch of enemies that heal to fire damage and we go with the Flamethrower, then there's going to be a lot of difficulty taking those people out, because unlike other people, MERAEADOR cannot even default to a default attack. There's no option there. It is, if we're going Flamethrower, purely the Flamethrower ability. If we're going for the Sleep-O-Matic, it's purely the Sleep-O-Matic, so on and so forth. So, my personal preference tends to be the Flamethrower because it can hit multiple people in one turn, whereas things like the Thermal Spanner only hit one. Yes, the Sleep-O-Matic and the Gas-O-Matic do also hit multiple people in one turn. However, they don't deal as much upfront damage, so for that reason, I think it's a little bit of a harder sell when, of course, MERAEADOR is the only person in the arena run and therefore needs to be the primary source of damage, whereas in a full party worth of people where MERAEADOR can fade into the background a little bit more, play a bit more of a support role, than things like the Sleep-O-Matic and Gas-O-Matic might make a little more sense. So I think, in the set of circumstances in which we find ourselves, Flamethrower is what I'm thinking we go with here, but bear in mind, if we do have enemies that are very resistant to fire, then we want to make sure we have other ways of dealing non-fire damage. Only way of making that happen for MERAEADOR will be to use the damaging potions like really cold water, liquid lightning, and bottled acid. And if you find that you use something other than the Flamethrower, then the Alchemist's Fire might be really relevant for you. So, those are our options there. In terms of our chest plates, let's talk a bit more about those. So, in the past, we saw the Night Jacket has been extremely effective when we are using characters who are capable of wearing it, because of all the resistances that it has, of course, mostly dark, but also a fair bit for fire, water, air, and earth as well. So it's hard to beat that. It does, of course, have 0 in the way of physical or magic defense, like we said before, and so if you're concerned about that, then you could make the case that you might want to use something other than the Night Jacket, and that might mean you're going with something like the Lesser Rainbow Shirt for 6 defense, 3 magic defense, a little bit less on the resistances, though they span a little bit more. It does include light resistance as well. So we could consider going that route, or if we wanted to go more specifically with one type of elemental resistance, then we could go with the Geo Jacket, or we could go with a little bit more of a hybrid approach, something like the Shaman's Vestment, Inventing Coat, Dark Robe, which all have 50% resistance of one variety or another, Earth, Dark, and Fire. Those are the options there, and then we could also go with the Stoles. Of course, with Solar, we had no option but using the Stoles, but even on MERAEADOR, you could make the case those are good as well. Steel Stole, very specialized in the way of physical defenses, with 10 physical defense would be the best option there, as well as 50% resistance to physical damage. That's the only way MERAEADOR can pick that up. However, nothing in the way of magic defense, nothing in the way of other resistances, might mean that we're not as keen on doing that. If MERAEADOR were perhaps a lower level and we felt that enemies' default attacks were strong enough to take him out in one hit, then that might make more sense. But I think because we've leveled up MERAEADOR a fair bit, we probably don't need to go that route. Then in terms of the other attribute boosting stoles, we could go the Spirit, Strength, or Vitality route. And I am a big fan of the +6 Vitality stole. I think that when you're going into the arena and you have only one person in your party out there, and if they go down, it's game over, this is a really nice safety blanket. However, I think that because we already have such high starting HP, or at least good enough, not to say that 1,200 is amazing, but it's solid. So I think that we probably don't need to go this route here, and we might find it more useful to go with the Night Jacket here. I say that as well in anticipation of some of the other things that we may be going to put on soon. In terms of helmets, let's go there next, so we can go with the Feather Crest for mostly magic defenses here, and a little bit of extra Spirit. One thing to bear in mind is because we're going with the Flamethrower, it does mean that Spirit will be the type of attribute that is affecting how much damage we do most of all, whereas if we were going with something like the Thermal Spanner, then it would be Strength. So that does mean that yes, +1 Spirit would be at least a little bit of a damage boost. Other than that, we could go a little bit higher in the defenses, combining them a bit between physical and magic defense with the Alpha Cap, and 20% Earth resistance is a little bonus. Or if we wanted to go more on the resistances, then the Black Hat would be preferable there with 50% resistance to Dark. Only one physical defense does mean that it is definitely weaker in that regard, though. So the Elf Cap is probably the most well-rounded here. I'm thinking let's try going with that. We might find that we don't need it if, say, we have mastered Earth Resistance, which we have, and we put that on the passive side, then might mean we, between that and the 20% resistance from the Night Jacket, might not find the 20% resistance on the Elf Cap all that needed, but we can revisit that if necessary. Then in terms of our accessories here, I think we've said it many times before, but the Scarab of Health, in terms of keeping people alive, is top of the list for sure. And then the Yellow Fairy has been fantastic for us as well, taking twice as many turns as we otherwise would. It means that offensively and even defensively, giving us the chance to use healing and status removing items has been fantastic as well. So 2 strong candidates there. Could, of course, go with something like the Emerald Bangle. Again, if we found that we wanted more Earth Resistance, or if we were concerned about how much HP we had, getting 3 Vitality and 30 HP, it's not a bad idea. 3 defense, 3 magic defense is also solid. But I think, for the most part, this is more or less just a weaker version of the Scarab of Health, with the one exception being the Earth Resistance. So the real question here would be, how much do we value that Earth Resistance? And I think, like we were saying before, we may not need it so much, so we probably would prefer the Scarab of Health over Emerald Bangles. Similar story with Sapphire Bangles, just rather than HP boosting, we have Spirit and MP boosting. Like we were saying at the beginning, MERAEADOR does not use any MP, and therefore, in that regard, not that relevant. However, of course, using the Flamethrower does mean that Spirit does boost the amount of damage we're doing. That could be helpful. The other thing is that, like I was saying, the weapon damage is based on MERAEADOR's level, and we have leveled up MERAEADOR a reasonable bit here. So we may actually find that we don't need too much damage. Of course, the more damage the better, don't get me wrong, but there might be other things that we prefer over upfront damage, like being able to go twice. Then we could go with the Eclipse Amulet, like I was saying before. We did consider this for Solar, but maybe not as much so with other people, and that's not to discredit this item. It is fantastic. 2 defense, 5 magic defense, that is very good. 2 spirit, again, would help offensively, and resistance to both light and dark. If we're using the Night Jacket, then the dark resistance is probably overkill, so that's not terribly relevant there, but light resistance would be a good way to make up for some of that, because the Night Jacket does not have anything in the way of light resistance, so that is one exception to the resistances here. However, I mean, like we said previously, it's just so good. It's really hard not to go with Scarab of Health and Yellow Fairy. I think that is what we will more or less be doing with just about everyone, unless we have a really good case to switch things up for one specific person. But I think with MERAEADOR, no, we're just going to keep it the same here. So we'll go with that, and then that does settle things in terms of items here, unless, of course, we find that after putting on skills, we want to switch things a little bit. So let's check that out. And MERAEADOR, yes, with Flamethrower, like we were saying before, that means only 1 active skill here. It engulfs all enemies in flames. So, yes, hits every single enemy, not just one. That is helpful. Mwahahaha. MERAEADOR's such a pacifist. Yeah, we've had that conversation with him before. It does seem as though perhaps a little bit against his character to be participating in these fights to begin with, and the Flamethrower is a little bit, well, aggressive at that. But anyways, in terms of our physical offensive reactions, no reason at all for us to use those if we are using the Flamethrower, because, like I said, there's no way for us to use physical attacks. There's not even a default attack option, so that's not relevant for us. In terms of physical defensive reactions, what with MERAEADOR being a rogue user, we don't have as much access to those abilities as, say, someone like Slinick, Vern, or Mardek would have, but we do have at least 10-20% reduction and some soaks, some evasion as well, so we'll take everything we can get here. Magic offensive reactions, these are more relevant if we are to use the Flamethrower, so again, we don't have too many of those because with our primary spellcasters, those are coming from their weapons, and MERAEADOR doesn't have any reactions coming from those. This is mostly just other stuff we can get, so we'll take everything we can have here. Then magic defensive reactions, we do have enough to throw on water resistance as well, and I think once more, we'll go with the generic options here. We actually do not have mastered the resist 30% spell damage, which is the one that is almost like the 20% evasion for physical defenses. That is another one that is generic enough that it would apply to any type of damage, doesn't matter if it's water, dark, whatever. And so I probably would prefer having that on rather than dark or water here. Is that reason to throw on the Dark Robe, which is the robe that gives that ability, this one here? You could perhaps make the case that it is. Of course, under ideal circumstances, we would have this one mastered, but apparently this one slipped through the cracks. So I think we'll stick with this one here. Although, you could also make the case that Resist Dark, when we're using the Night Jacket, is also not terribly relevant because we're already healing to dark damage, so this isn't adding too much. Yeah, it does mean we're healing more when we get hit by dark spells, so it's not to say that it's completely valueless, but again, if given the option, I would definitely prefer to have Resist spell damage 30% on in its place. Let's talk about passives though. As for what we have next here, let's get rid of everything we have activated at the moment, so we'll get rid of experience here. And again, I was saying that I'm feeling pretty decent about where we are from an HP standpoint. We did also throw on the Scarab of Health, which gives +5 vitality, so that will boost it a little bit further. So if we were feeling concerned, we could throw on 10-20% HP here, but I don't necessarily think that's necessary, and NP, like I said, is completely meaningless, so no need to do that. Then in terms of status immunities, we could opt to throw those on, but let's start off with our resistances here, because Resist Dark, not so valuable, especially if we have the Night Jacket and also Magic Dark Resistance on. Definitely don't need all that stuff on simultaneously, otherwise we are probably well above our 200% Dark Resistance cap. So let's throw on something like Rainbow Aura, I'm thinking, to give us the 20% resistance across the board. And then from there, we could throw on Earth, and then that leaves us with 4 remaining, so now perhaps we consider throwing on 1 status immunity, and which one do we think is preferable amongst the ones that we have access to here? We could go with numbness immunity, and remember that MERAEADOR is a little bit odd in the way that normally numbness would be a status that would prevent people from using physical attacks and only physical attacks. However, I vaguely remember that when we were in the Crimson Peak with MERAEADOR, that even when he got numbed, he still was not able to use magic abilities, so that is, I think, something that is unique to MERAEADOR. A little strange in that way, but could perhaps be reason for on suppleness, even if we are not anticipating that we are going to use much in the way of physical attacks. In the past, I've also spoken about how sleep, confusion, and paralysis tend to be statuses that I'm most concerned about, in particular when we are in the arena mode, because if we get any of these on, then it might prevent us from taking our turn or doing what we want to do on our turn, whereas something like poison, bleed, other types of statuses, silence, curse, at least you can, on your turn, use an item to remove that status like a remedy, and then you're good to go, whereas if you're, say, paralyzed and skip your turn, then you can't do that. So for that reason, I do think we'd probably go for one of these 3. As for which one we would prefer, that's a good question. Of course, can't necessarily predict per se what we're going to run into here. I think that sleep, generally speaking, what happens is we get put to sleep, and then as soon as we get hit, we wake up. So that one maybe not quite as concerning as something like confusion or paralysis. I would say confusion is more dangerous because we could actually end up attacking and hurting ourselves. However, I'd say it's much less common than paralysis is. Although not as dangerous, this is something that we're probably, most likely to run into, or at least more likely to run into than confusion. So in the name of being a little bit safe here and trying to get at least something out of throwing on this status immunity, why don't we go with locomotion here? You could, of course, make the case that if we wanted to, we could throw on a little bit more vitality if we were concerned about the HP, more spirit if we wanted to boost our damage bit, agility, like we said before. MERAEADOR's lowest starting attribute is agility, so that might be reason to throw on a little bit more to go first more often. But I'm thinking this is looking pretty good as things currently stand. Let's see where that leaves us. We're on 1,600 HP, so yes, we have gone up a bit since throwing on the Scarab of Hell. In terms of resistances, we are actually well above 100% for fire resistance. I do believe that the flamethrower gives 75% fire resistance, in addition to MERAEADOR being a fire elemental character. So that is already enough there. And then throwing on resist earth, as well as some other things like the elf hat, we find that yes, we are now also above 100% resistance on earth and dark with the night jacket as well. So we're looking very good on resistances here. Yes, like I said, we do have a magic resistance for dark, which is probably not necessary here, but since we don't have any other mastered magic abilities, there isn't really much of an alternative other than, say, taking off the night jacket and throwing on dark robe instead, which does give 50% dark resistance. So we would be close to capped on dark resistance, yes, but we would also lose some of our water, air, earth, and fire resistance, which we would probably still like to hold on to. So I'm thinking, let's keep things as they are right now, and let's just make a point of healing up so that we restore that HP that we gained when we threw on the Scarab of Health there, and we'll save before hopping in, just in case we find ourselves in a bit of a trap, because we could find, much like we saw with Slimic in their arena run, that because we don't have a lot of access to different types of elemental damage, that MERAEADOR could get trapped going against some kind of enemy that heals to fire damage. Of course, the hope would be that we'll still have access to our potions and we can use those to deal damage, but if we get enraged, like what happened with Slimic, then that might not be an option. So let's go to the survival tournament, and we will, of course, choose to do so with MERAEADOR. And away we go. So, round 1, who we go against here? A bunch of ghasts. So they are undead enemies, and they do go before us, however they do deal dark damage, so that means that no risk there, they will actually heal us. Let's take a closer look. They are weak to fire, so at least in the first round here, it does seem as though the flamethrower is a good fit. We'll use it, and I think we should be able to comfortably take them all out. So hopefully we will find more of those types of enemies. That would be no problem at all. However, what do we have in round 2? We have some rat bats. They are also certainly faster than us. However, they also deal dark damage, which means also we are healing from that. And they are also weak to fire damage, so that should mean that same idea here. Use the flamethrower, and certainly comfortable taking them out as well. So please continue to bring on the enemies that are weak to fire damage. That would be great. Who's next? A bunch of leaf stingers. So these guys may not be weak to fire. They are also, of course, quite quick, and they did poison us here. Hope would be that we can heal that one off with, yes, regeneration. And also, we do have over 100% earth resistance as well, so this is the benefit of loading up on as many resistances as we did. It does mean that we have a lot of flexibility, at least defensively, maybe not as much offensively. Let's take our first turn here to remove our poison, and then I think after that, we will try to take these guys out. We'll take a closer look as to just how effective the flamethrower might be. So we get rid of the poison there, and if we double check the leaf stingers, they are also very weak to fire, and they have low HP, so it should take them out as well. Definitely does. And again, you see that MERAEADOR'S damage is based on primarily just his level, because there's no base damage on the weapon, so we are dealing a ton of damage at that. Who's next? Okay, so this is where things get tricky, because of course the fire elemental, that heals to fire damage, so that does mean that here is our first enemy that flamethrower will not work against. As for the earth elemental, it has 50% fire resistance, so I'm thinking we lead off with a flamethrower. We hope this has enough power to take out the earth elemental. We know it won't have enough power to take out the fire elemental. For that one, we will need to use an item, and it's not quite enough to take out the earth elemental, meaning they will both go here. However, we heal to both earth and fire damage, so we can actually do this pretty safely here. So let's do another flamethrower. That will take out the earth elemental. It will heal the fire elemental. It's on full HP. No problems there, though. Not going to make a difference. Instead, what we'll do with this one is use the really cold water on the assumption that, yes, water is the best way to go against you. So let's do that. And just one of them will do the trick. So a little bit more difficult that time round, at least offensively. Like we said, though, defensively, actually, no problem at all. Round 5, roughly halfway through here. And Yellow Souls, I don't think we've seen these guys before. Air damage this time, so that means that we don't have as much resistance to that. We did heal off some of it, but we are still slightly damaged here. Only looking at 40% resistance to that. And then, in terms of flamethrower you, generally speaking, fire, yes, is particularly effective against air elemental enemies, so it does seem like, offensively at least, this should work. Could have perhaps made the case that we should have maybe even just passed a turn, used the regen to heal up a little bit, because it does mean that going into this next fight here, we will not quite be on full HP. But round 6 we have against a combination of people from Saul's Dungeon, some green souls and blood zombies. Let's look at these guys here, and you are weak to fire. Green souls. Weak is maybe not the right way to phrase it, but less strong to fire for you guys, so it does seem that, once more, flamethrower would be best. Again, if we're confident that we can take these guys out in one turn, then it might make sense to deliberately wait here, which I will do. Get us back up to full HP, and then use flamethrower. Now we're taking a bit of a risk here. We could find that we don't have enough damage to take these guys out in one turn, in which case they will, of course, all get the chance to go, and we will definitely not be on full HP after that. Let's give this a shot, though, and it is enough, so it did pay off. Like I said, MERAEADOR'S damage, it's gotten high enough that we can do things like that. Round 7 now, and an Axolotl Chief. Okay, let's take a closer look. I am skeptical that you are going to have fire weakness. Yes, unfortunately, nothing in that way. So we could perhaps opt to use a earth elemental damage potion rather than using a flamethrower. You will go next, the Axolotl Chief here, so does mean that if we don't take it out immediately, then it will presumably have the time to damage us. Let's try using the earth damage with this potion here. And it is enough. Yes. So, also, fairly straightforward there, as long as we come loaded up with those potions. Definitely was important for us to make a point of doing that with MERAEADOR, like we said, with him only having fire elemental damage. Okay, this is another interesting one here. Blue Souls, which we saw in the Miasmal Citadel. Then the Omuronaut, I believe we saw in someone else's arena already, and then you summoned a yellow soul here. So we took a little bit of damage, but then appeared to heal all that off. let's take a closer look at your weaknesses and strengths. So you do have 16 magic defense and 0 fire weakness or resistance, so hard to say as whether we will have enough damage to take you out or not. You have 1,336 HP. I think it's going to be close. The blue souls, similar to other spirits that we fought, are weaker to fire damage here, and 10 magic defense is something, but I think you have low enough HP here that I'm fairly certain we can take you out. And then, of course, we did fight a yellow soul previously, and we were certainly able to take you out, so not terribly concerned about you. I think we go for the flamethrower here, we see what it does, it might be enough. It is not quite enough to take out the biggest of those enemies there, but we do still have one more turn here, so this should do the trick. Power of Haste gets the job done there. Okay, so round 9, second to last one, we might see ourselves starting to go up against mini-bosses here. Not quite. These guys, yes, do have decent damage, but at least in terms of defenses against us, they don't have much in the way of that, because they are still weak to fire, and yes, the magic defense, it's something, but we've seen plenty of times we can take them out, and for that reason, we are somewhat low on HP here, or at least relative to previous rounds. I know, obviously, we're still quite healthy at the moment, but my point is, why not pass here? We know we can take these guys out in one turn, so we'll restore a little bit of HP with the regen, then we'll use the flamethrower. This should take them all out. They may be higher level than some of the previous ones that we fought, but still more than enough damage, so no issues there. Then this will be the last round, so what does the arena have in store for us here? It is another one of these mini-bosses we saw, I believe it was Solar, had one of these relatively late on, although not actually Solar's final enemy. So let's double check what the deal is. You have 10 magic defense, 0 fire resistance, so that does mean that we'll deal reasonable damage, but I'm not sure we'll be able to take you out in one hit. Might be enough to take you out in 2, though. Let's give this a shot, let's see how much damage it does. Roughly, half your HP there, so yeah, I would think we just give it another shot here, see how it goes, and that might be that. Not quite, just shy, so we'll of course get the chance to attack here. That means we take 300 or so damage, we can heal roughly half of that on our first turn from regen, and so once again, if we wanted to get clever, we could pass a turn here, restore more HP, and then use flamethrower to take it out now. This is of course the last round, so we don't need to make too much of a point of making sure we're on maximum HP and without any statuses, because there's nothing coming after this, but why not? So, that will be that. The final enemy for MERAEADOR is down, so success for him. And so we get the Spanner Charm. Congratulations, fighter. You have won the tournament, apparently. Here, have a prize. Also, get out of here. Okay, so how did things stack up with MERAEADOR? I think that, generally speaking, the flamethrower was very effective. We saw many enemies that were, if not somewhat weak, extremely weak to fire damage, so that worked well. We did, on a few occasions, need to have the other elemental damage potion stockpiled in case we did need to go for something else, but if and when we needed to do that, that was more than enough, so well done, MERAEADOR. Let's take a closer look at what your reward was there. So, it was this Spanner Charm here, which is an accessory with 4 defense, 4 magic defense, a special item that MERAEADOR won from the arena. Only he can equip it. No abilities, which I suppose would be strange if it did have any, given how, like we said previously, MERAEADOR is only getting abilities from the weapons, so that would be quite a change if that suddenly were to come from an accessory here. Other than that, it is of course only usable by MERAEADOR. It does have 3 Spirit, 3 Vitality, and 30% resistance to fire, 20% resistance to water, so emphasizing his elemental strengths and covering for his elemental weaknesses there. And why don't we have a quick chat with our latest victor, MERAEADOR. What do you have to say about your arena run there? Mardek? Can we have a private little chat quietly? So nobody else can hear? I suppose so. I mean, we are kind of in a relatively crowded room at the moment. But, okay. What is it? It is embarrassing to mention this, but Gloria, that young shaman. She's beautiful. She's also standing directly in front of me. Do you think she's noticed me? Has she been looking or anything? MERAEADOR'S blushing. Oh yeah, she's totally into you. I mean, on one hand, I feel like Mardek is just saying that because that's something Mardek would say. At the same time, I do think we perhaps have reason to suspect that there are some mutual feelings there. Thinking of back to when MERAEADOR and Gloria were summoning the souls to inhabit Legion's body, and they were giving each other a look or two. What? Are you being serious? Well, haven't you seen the way she blushes and stumbles over her words around you? I think she's got a thing for you. Oh, yeah, see, Mardek might be onto something here. Oh my. And yet I'm fearful of pursuing this matter. I'm much older than she is, you see. She is 16, isn't she? A mere child in many ways, yet I'm almost twice her age. I do not wish to be an old fool and stifle her youth. I only want what's best for her, and I do not think that I am it. Oh, MERAEADOR. Well, I think she loves you. Whoa, Mardek. Okay, coming on a little bit strong, I would say. Generally not the kind of thing to say on someone else's behalf. You could say that maybe it's worth trying to see if there's something there, but that's a strong way to start things off. And that age is meaningless when it comes to love. So, you think it would be okay for a 10-year-old to fall in love with an elderly grandmother? Okay, well, logical extreme, yes, maybe that's pushing the limits a bit. But Mardek? Yeah, why not? Then perhaps you are not the most sensible year to inflict this issue upon right now. Yeah, MERAEADOR, you know, you may not be wrong about that. Mardek, maybe with not the best perspective there. I mean, give it a shot, don't get me wrong, but I will mull over these thoughts. For now, I will keep things as they are. Alright, so with that, we have one more successful arena run. In terms of where that stacks up relative to the difficulties of other people's arena runs, I would still say that we probably benefited a lot from MERAEADOR being a fairly high level, yes, so might have had that warp our perception a little bit of the relative difficulty of MERAEADOR'S arena. If we were to try to rank the various arenas that we've gone through at this stage, though, would probably still put Eloian at the top as the easiest one. Again, I think that's another case of one that we leveled her up a lot, and so the amount of difficulty that we had with that relative to what other people might have if they were to, say, have not leveled up Eloian as much, that might have been a factor. So at least in our case personally, Eloian probably the easiest, followed by Gloria, then MERAEADOR and Solar, then Slimmic last. I think that's probably how it all ranks at the moment. As for who will be the next one, give the arena a try? Well, tune in next time to find out.